Brakes are good. Good brakes are great. We're going to show you how to bleed your Hayes Dominion brakes step by step. Okay, for this brake bleed, you'll need a bleed kit, and you can go down a number of avenues. You can get the Hayes version, which is a great bleed kit in itself, or you can get an aftermarket one, say like Park Tools do one, but you will need to get one that's designed for DOT fluid, because that's what's inside Hayes brakes. In addition to the bleed kit, you'll need a little selection of hex wrenches and torque wrenches too. You need a T10 for the bleed bolts here on the lever and on the caliper. You'll need a 3, a 2.5, a 4 and a 5mm hex wrench. And that's just to adjust the brake. Obviously, if you've got to remove a wheel, you may need a 6 as well. You'll also need a torque wrench, and you'll need some protective clothing, because DOT is quite harmful, not just for clothing, but for us as well. So make sure you've got gloves and protective eyewear. And finally, you'll need some disc brake spray to clean up after the job is done. Hayes brake uses both mineral and DOT in their brakes, so double check which system you've got. With these Dominions, they're using DOT fluid, and DOT fluid stands for Department of Transport. It's a really high performance brake fluid. It is toxic though, so you need to be really careful with handling it, so wear gloves, wear protective eyewear, and you need to be really careful handling the old fluid and dispose of it safely. The other thing you need to be mindful of is that over time it can absorb water. So if there's any air in the container, if it's not a freshly sealed container, it may absorb water, and that will be detrimental to how your brake feels. So make sure that you use a fresh container. For this system, it's 5.1. As with many tasks here on GMBN this one is much easier in a work stand. And I say easier, I'd almost say essential. And that's because Hayes recommend turning your bars to 45 degrees just to get the brake lever and key the bleed point in the right place. That's if there's any air trapped in the system, you want it to be able to pull up or push up as we bleed into the highest point. So if the brake lever's not as high as it can be, well, there's a chance you're going to get air trapped in the system. First things first, we'll take the wheel out to avoid any contamination on the disc rotor. Next is to remove the brake pads, again, so we don't contaminate them. With the pads safely stored away from where they could get cross-contamination or any contamination, time to put the requisite bleed block in. Use the pad retention bolt to hold in the piston spacer. Time to remove the caliper and any mounting hardware. You might wonder why we've removed the caliper, and that's because it's best practice from Hayes. One of the reasons is it's a little bit easier to actually see where we're screwing in the syringes. The other reason is because it keeps the syringes up vertical, and it means that then any air that's trapped in this caliper, we can pull up. So as we're cycling the fluid through, it means that we won't have any air bubbles. Before we slid in this piston spacer, we double check that the pistons are in the right place. Just be mindful, this brake is brand new, but if yours has been on your bike a little while and you've taken the pads out, you might need to reset your pistons. They can migrate in as your pads wear, so just use an open wrench to push them gently in, just to ensure that those pistons are fully seated in the caliper. We've filled 2 syringes, one 1/3 full and one 3/4 full. And we've got a little bit of air in both of them, and it's really important we just bleed that out. So holding the syringe vertically so we can see that the air is in the top, and with a cloth we're gently going to pressurise it and move that air up, out through the hose till it squirts out. Then we're going to lock just there. We're going to repeat that process to the second syringe. Syringe is vertical, and then just purge and push out that bubble, then lock off. This 5.1 DOT fluid was fresh out of a sealed container, but we're still going to purge it. What does that mean? It means we're going to try and pull out any air that might have still got in. So by doing that, we're going to close off the lower section of the hose on the syringe, and then we're going to give upward pressure here. And you can see some bubbles just pulling up. Even though the fluid was fresh, there's been some time where there's been air in the system and in that bottle. And some of that air has got moisture in, and that's going to absorb into this fluid. So we'll just pull it and purge it again. The vacuum pressure I'm pulling is quite a lot, so it makes the bubbles look really big. There's not actually that much fluid in there. So we've got one tiny bubble, which we need to purge. On the base of the Hayes Dominion caliper, we've got 2 bleed ports. You can undo either one of these with a T10 torque. We're positioning the caliper just a little bit below the lever. Place the bleed screw somewhere safe so we don't lose it. Now carefully thread the 3/4 full syringe. Make sure it's tight so that there's no fluid loss or air ingestion. Okay, with the brake lever, or master cylinder it's also known, we're going to try and position that so this bleed port is in the highest point. And that's so if there is any air in the system, we should be able to push it out. Again, using a T10 torque, just slot it in and undo it. Again, put it somewhere safe, you don't want to lose it. Taking your second syringe, which is 1/3 filled, thread it into the bleed port. Make sure it's tight to avoid any fluid loss or air ingestion. Hold the caliper vertically to ensure that these bleed ports are up. Undo the hose clamp on the syringe and apply a little bit of upward pressure, a small vacuum. That will help suck out any air that's got trapped into this end of the caliper when we've attached the syringe. With the lower syringe set up, now it's time to unlock the lever syringe. With slight downward pressure on the caliper syringe, we're going to cycle the air through the system. We can see the bubbles passing through and pushing up. Once we've transferred most of the fluid from the caliper syringe to the lever syringe, we're now going to reverse that process and we're going to pull with some light upward pressure on the caliper syringe to pull that fluid back through and any bubbles that might be trapped in the system. Once that's happened, we're going to cycle the fluid back through. Repeat this process until there's no more air bubbles left in the system. Applying positive pressure to the caliper syringe, we're going to push the fluid through whilst flicking the brake lever. We can feel the pulsing up here as we're moving the fluid through. Allow the lever to snap back. I'm going to pull light pressure on the syringe on the caliper just to pull the fluid back through and repeat the process of snapping that brake lever back. Keeping the syringe on the caliper as still as possible, I'm going to pull a light pressure on the lever syringe and just try and pull through a light vacuum more of the bubbles. In the process of this bleed, we've pulled through quite a lot of air, which you might worry is a problem, but it's not. I can show you how to just bleed the syringe itself. Lock it out using the hose lock. Invert the syringe, just so we've got all the air at the top. Now with a rag, carefully undo this section of the syringe, not all the way, just a little bit. Apply upward pressure, so positive force to the syringe until all those bubbles get pushed out. Then tighten up the syringe, release the hose lock. The Dominion brake from Hayes is really nice, and that's because you can do an independent bleed on the caliper itself. You might wonder, but I'm doing it already. Often you are, but calipers have got two sides and you've got 4 pistons in this one. You can do a bleed on each side of the caliper, and that's what we're going to do now to ensure that there's no bubbles in the system whatsoever. We've got one syringe attached already, we've got it locked off. Now we're going to use our trusty T10 to remove the second bleed port. With both syringes fitted, it's time to unlock the hoses on both. Ooh. Ensuring that we keep the syringes and these bleed ports vertical, we're just going to gently put pressure on one syringe, the one with a little bit more in, and then a little bit of negative pressure on the second syringe, and just cycle, like this, the fluid between. Okay, this is a little bit tricky because you've got your hands very full, but once you're happy that there's no more air in the system, especially in the caliper, it's time to lock off that additional syringe, unscrew it, refit the bleed port, and then complete the rest of the bleed. Okay, I feel pretty confident that we've got pretty much all the air that we can out of this system. So I'm going to start by closing stuff up. And first, I need to apply a little bit of positive pressure to the syringe on the caliper, just a little bit of pressure, and then I'm going to lock it off. Ensuring that the caliper is still lower than the lever, we can carefully unthread this. There may be a bit of overspill, so have a rag to hand just in case. ensuring that you keep the caliper vertical, refit the bleed port screw. Apply a little bit of positive pressure on the syringe on the lever, just a little bit, just to nurse out any last remaining bubbles. Now lock off the hose on the syringe. With the rag underneath to catch any excess fluid, undo the lever syringe. Now thread in the lever bleed port screw. With everything set up, now time for a bit of disc brake cleaner to clean off any excess fluid. Using a 3mm wrench, undo the pad retention bolt that's holding in your piston spacer. Now put in the pads and put in the pad retention bolt. Refit the caliper to the various mounts to the fork or frame, reinsert the wheel, and then spend a little bit of time realigning it. Hopefully this video has been a help for you to bleed your Hayes Dominion brakes, so now they feel as amazing as they can do. If you've got any questions on brake bleeds or any other topics on mountain bikes, then don't forget to use the hashtag AskGMBNTech, where we answer your questions.